Are you sure, Jen, that you read the right introduction? Okay. Good morning, everybody. And I'd like to thank the MUFON Board of Directors for inviting me here. I'm delighted. Mike, that's a very good point. I haven't had a chance to speak closer. Okay. How's that? I haven't had a chance to speak to MUFON, the MUFON Symposium, for a number of years, not since, I think it was Kentucky a few years ago. And we had very few people showing up at 9 o'clock in the morning, so this is a good sign. I think MUFON is progressing every year in improving the presentations. A couple of housekeeping issues here to begin with. I'm using the hand mic because there have been obvious audio issues with the clip-on. So if I am too loud, please shout out. And if you can't hear me, well, maybe that's a good thing. At the press conference, Cheryl, the Master of Ceremonies, made a comment. She said that there is a wide spectrum of belief here. On one hand, there are the ultra-Orthodox folks who say there's no secret space program at all. There's NASA, ESA, China, Russia, and India, and that's it. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are those who say we're in a full-on Star Trek universe. I am more in the middle, to be honest. I'm a moderate on this. Now, a couple of items. At the end of my presentation, I'll be showing you my my website address, and I have a freebie offer. Since I'm a stand-in speaker, I will send out a freebie copy of my presentation to you if you'll just go to my website and use the email service and request a copy of it. I am wearing a special uniform today to emphasize a point. Can anyone guess what it is? The Men in Black. Actually, it's navy blue and battleship gray. Now, if there are any Navy folks here, you will understand what I'm saying. Any human space fleet will be commanded by not colonels and generals, but by captains and admirals. And keep that in mind. That's the purpose of my wearing this. Okay, my talk today is about modeling the secret space program. I will use the term SSP to make it a little easier for me to speak. Let me go to the topics of my talk today. I'm going to be giving you a grand tour of the Antelope Valley, Southern California. This is sort of like what Michael Schratt did yesterday. We'll talk about the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, and then the 1992 and 1993 presentations by Ben Rich. We'll talk about Paul Hellyer, a name that hasn't been suggested or mentioned here so far, and the late Dr. Michael Wolf. Once again, another maybe new name to some of you. We'll talk about the Wolf model. That's the first model of 3. And then we'll be talking about Dr. Michael Sala and Corey Good's testimony. I'll be presenting what I call the good model, and then we'll have a merging of the models into what I call the hybrid model, which is a combination of both. And lastly, I'll be suggesting a hypothesis of my own. By the way, when I speak of a TR-3B, I'm speaking of this craft on the top. Michael Schratt called it a flying triangle. That works perfectly well with me, but some of you know it as a TR-3B. I don't know if that's the correct designation, but that's what it's been called. The illustration below is a typical cigar-shaped cylindrical shaped spacecraft. This would be interstellar, by the way. Okay, let me take you on a tour of the Antelope Valley. This is about, an hour to an hour and a half's drive north of Los Angeles. If you go up the 5 freeway, let's see, it fades out. That's too bad. Well, anyway, if you go up the 5 freeway and then turn off on Highway 14 towards the Palmdale, you'll eventually come to the Antelope Valley. And if you continue on north up to the 14, all the way up to the top of this little map, you'll come to the small town of Mojave. Now, Mojave is another aerospace center. It's called the Mojave Air and Spaceport. This is where Spaceship One was designed, built, and flown. I had the opportunity to actually witness one of those 2 flights. And after completing the second flight, it was awarded a $10 million X Prize. The Spaceship One was built by Scaled Composites, which is right there at the spaceport. I might also mention that I was a former employee of BAE Systems, and BAE Systems had a division there as well. If you go south, you will, to the right of your map, you would see Edwards Air Force Base. Now, Edwards is currently called the Air Force Test Center and Material Command. And this is where most of the X-planes were tested and flown in the late 40s and 50s and 60s and are still being flown there now. It's where, by the way, the space shuttle landed on occasion. Also at Edwards Air Force Base is NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center. So it's a combination of Air Force and NASA. Across the street, so to speak, across the 14 freeway, and in the foothills of the Tehachapi Mountains is a facility that's colloquially called the Anthill. This is operated by Northrop Grumman. It's a multi-story underground facility. Some of you may be wondering how I know that. In the early 90s, someone by the name of Gary Schultz took me there. It's very difficult to find. We drove up to the front gate. There was a guard gate there, but there weren't any signs whatsoever. And finally, the guard came up to us, and there was no sign. There was no sign at all. It didn't say Northrop Grumman Secret Underground R&D Center. Okay? It didn't say anything. The guard said, "What are you here for?" "Well, we want to see the underground facilities," Gary said. And the guard said, "You're on private property. Turn around and get out of here right away." But it is there. Actually, Gary Schultz also had another way of showing me this facility. There was at least a plateau above the anthill where you could actually just drive up to and look down on this facility, and you could see that it was a V shape like that, and there were 3 diamond-shaped markings on it. And Gary told me that in the past he had seen a flying disc rising vertically out of one of those diamond-shaped spaces or points. Well, that sounds sort of bizarre, I suppose. But believe it or not, since I was living there in the Antelope Valley, I lived there for 6 years, and I had a chance to actually fly over this facility because there was no restriction in the airspace. So we flew over it, and I looked down at one of these diamond shapes, and it turned out to be a clamshell covering like you would find on a Minuteman silo. And the clamshell was open. And I looked down, and of course it was black, but the point being, it is an underground facility and reputed to have many layers, or levels. Proceeding south, you'll come through my old hometown of Lancaster, And in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a small town called Llano, Llano. That was formerly owned by McDonnell Douglas. They also have an underground facility there. It's a fairly long walk from Llano, but it was visible at that time. Continuing back down the 14 towards Palmdale. Of course, Palmdale, as you heard from Michael Schratt, is the home of Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Skunk Works. And I might add that there is a second Lockheed Skunk Works underground facility, which I've also seen from the outside of the gate, located in Hellendale, which is well off the map. Basically, what I'm trying to explain is that the Antelope Valley is one of the premier aerospace R&D centers. Now let's take a look just briefly at the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. If you get off the 14 freeway on Palmdale Boulevard and then turn north on the Sierra Highway, you will come to a big box of a building. This is the Skunk Works, or more accurately, the Lockheed Martin Advanced Development Company. In fact, if you're unsure whether it's the Lockheed Skunk Works or not, there's a small emblem of a skunk actually on the outside of that building, as you can see in the lower, at the bottom of the picture. Now, in 1992, oh, excuse me, I didn't finish speaking here. On the right down below is a photograph of Kelly Johnson, the first director of the Skunk Works, and when he retired, Ben Rich took over for him. In 1992, Ben Rich put on a lecture at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I was not there. I was not there. But a video was made. And as I understand it, Michael Schratt will be providing a copy of that video to MUFON headquarters. Now, it was about the video itself was about an hour long, and Ben Rich gave a short history of the Skunk Works. They were all photographs, except for the final slide. The final slide was not a photograph. It was a drawing. And in fact, it was black and white. And this is what it was. Essentially, what he said, as well as I can remember, the U.S. Air Force has just given Lockheed Martin a contract to take ET home. And then he showed this image, and then the entire audience broke out into laughter, and that was the end of the video. Now, this image has been light blasted, and it's been enhanced. The original had there was a star field and a very bright individual star in the upper right-hand corner. And whoever did this enlightened the perimeter of the flying disc so that it could be seen. Now, about 6 months later, there was another lecture at UCLA in 1993. And Jan Harzan called me up and said, "Hey, how would you like to hear a history of the Skunk Works?" And I said, "Terrific." He said, "It's at UCLA, and be sure to show up early." So I did. And Ben Rich started off by saying this: "Do not ask me about the Aurora program. There are CIA agents in the audience, and I recognize them. I do not want to go to prison." This is exactly what he said. Now, there were 150 specially invited guests in this auditorium. There were people from academia, from the aerospace press. There were obviously other people from the aerospace industry. There were at least 2 Air Force blue suiters there and the CIA agents that I just mentioned. But as his talk progressed, he started showing a few color images. And then he said, oddly, If you can imagine it, Lockheed Martin has done it. Well, Jan and I were stunned by that one statement because we both have a very vivid imagination. Then he showed some more photos, and then he said, how do we get to the stars? Well, it was a rhetorical question. And he said, not by chemical rockets, not by rockets and chemical propellants, but by using a new technology. And then he made the very unusual statement saying Lockheed Martin now has the technology to go to the stars. Well, Jan and I were totally stunned at that point. No one was laughing, by the way. Then he showed his final slide. It was another black and white image of a flying disc, without any question. No wings, no vertical stabilizers, very straightforward, very dark gray or black flying disc. Now, this is the image that appeared in my book on UFOs. I've come under some flack because I put in a colored image in the background, because my book is in color. But anyway, if you can imagine this without any background whatsoever, that's as close as I can come to what he showed. Now these are two images of what has been called the, quote, aurora, unquote. This is as I understand it, a hypersonic space plane that can achieve orbit. This is apparently or something similar to this. This is a computer-generated image. This is as close as most people can come to that. It's probably not called that, but I imagine it was one of those budgeted line items that Michael Schratt was talking about yesterday. Just a line item called Aurora. And the TR-3B is on the right. This is Michael Schratt's flying triangle. And I might add that when I was living in Lancaster, there were reports that a very large, very dark flying triangle flew very low and very slowly right over the center of Lancaster towards Edwards Air Force Base. I did not see it, but it's reported to have a very mammoth size. It completely blocked out the star field, I was told. And it's about 600 feet or so on each side, if you can imagine that. Now, on Friday, some of you heard, hopefully most of you heard, Dr. Michael Sala's talk. And frankly, he stole a little bit of my thunder, because no one else has talked about military space stations this weekend. In 1965, I was a graduate student, and I received a summer job working for Douglas Aircraft Company as a summer intern. They hired on about half dozen of us to participate in a 3-month program. Mostly it was to work at one of their facilities in Seal Beach. They were assembling the Saturn 4B stage. But there was another facility in Santa Monica that was their headquarters, and every once in a while they'd have sort of an educational program. One day they said, "Oh, you're in luck today. We're going to show you something that's secret." And wow, was this a big thing for me then. Well, they took us into a room and they showed us a wooden mock-up of the Manned Orbiting Laboratory. This was a U.S. Air Force contract that Douglas had received to build a military space station. It was just a wood mock-up, but nevertheless, it was obvious at that time that the U.S. Air Force wanted manned space stations. If some of you remember a quotation from General Curtis LeMay, He said space operations are just an extension of air operations. Now, I might add that there was one test flight article of the manned orbiting laboratory that was fabricated. They mounted it on top of a Titan III, and on top of that was a Gemini, a two-man Gemini capsule. Without anyone aboard, they successfully launched it toward the end of the 60s, but shortly after that, the MOL project was canceled, at least officially. Now, for those of you who are carefully listening to Dr. Sala, he mentioned that there is a possibility that the manned orbiting laboratory might have turned into a permanent military space station consisting of 9 segments in a circular or ring-shaped orientation whereby they used more than one MOL module combined with literally space debris, in other words, former booster containers. According to Dr. Sala, there were 49 Titan boosters launched during that period of time from Vandenberg. Why Vandenberg? Because they would be launched into a polar orbit. At the same time, after MOL, the Soviets had their own military space stations. They were all called Salyuts. Now, Salyuts was a research space station. You can see some examples of them on the bottom. They were all called Salyuts, but 2 of them were Almaz military space stations. Now, at about the same time, or during this period of time, there was a offensive weapon which was proposed as an unmanned satellite called what was referred to as rods from God, literally. This was a satellite that was intended to launch a 20-foot, basically telephone pole, about 1 foot in diameter. It was to be launched, and then it was guided or directed toward the target. It was non-nuclear, and it was intended as a kinetic energy weapon to destroy underground facilities. Now, whether or not that progressed or not, I don't know, but this would be one possible application of a military space station. Now, I won't spend an awful lot of time on this. You've seen this image come up before. We have a photograph of Bill Tompkins and his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials. I would suggest that you all read this book because it gives you a sense of the thinking in the mid-50s. What is displayed here is a conceptual sketch or a conceptual drawing of a very large cigar-shaped spacecraft carrier that was incorporated in more formalized drawings as a proposal, presumably to the U.S. Navy. This was a monster. It was about a mile long. Now, this is sort of hard to imagine, but that was what was proposed, and it was to be constructed of modules. Now, yesterday you also heard about Gary McKinnon. Personally, I think he provided some serious evidence. As a Scottish hacker, he broke into NASA and military websites. And I won't go into the details, but he came up with an Excel list of non-terrestrial officers. There were about 20 or 30, roughly, with the names, ranks, ships, including ship-to-ship transfers and fleet-to-fleet transfers. Now, he doesn't remember the names of any of the ships now, but at the time, apparently, he took that list of ships and compared them to the list of U.S. Navy surface ships and submarines, and none of them appeared. So one conclusion, of course, would be that this is a list of non-terrestrial officers that are manning a spacecraft or a space fleet. Just to give you a sense of what sort of size we're talking about, this is an image that was shown yesterday. We're looking at a spacecraft, obviously, cylinder-shaped, and it's being compared to the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. The Gerald R. Ford is approximately 1,200 feet long. And this spacecraft would then be something just slightly short of 1,000 feet. If any of you have ever been on a modern-day aircraft carrier and walked the flight deck or been into the hangar deck, you'll understand how massive these aircraft carriers are. If you ever get down to San Diego and the Carl Vinson is in town or one of the other aircraft carriers and they have an open house, be sure to drop by and take a tour. You'll be very amazed. According to this diagram, I don't know who actually did the diagram, but there were some 460 or 70 crew members aboard this. The name USS Hillenkoetter, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I don't know where that name came from, other than the fact that there was an Admiral Hillenkoetter, who was a director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and later allegedly became the chairman of Majestic 12, or MJ-12. And if that's true, then that's not a bad name to use. Okay. Now, let me just say, we started out sort of slowly. Many of you have heard this talk before, or something similar. I just wanted to remind MUFON that you all haven't been here for 10 or more years at various symposiums. Some of you are new to this. As a matter of fact, I met a gentleman just yesterday who was sitting beside me, and he said, "I've never been to a UFO conference before." Is this true? Well, my response was, absolutely. Some of this is absolutely true, I can assure you. Some of it are claims that have not been substantiated yet. Some of it is just total speculation, and the rest will seem very strange and bizarre to you. But don't feel bad. I've been studying this subject for 65 years, and it still seems strange and bizarre to me. Okay, let's get into the modeling part. We're doing okay on time. I'd like to introduce the name Paul Hellyer. Paul Hellyer is, or was, the Minister of Transportation of Canada. When he was the Minister of Transportation, he had no interest in UFOs or ETs. As far as he was concerned, it's a hoax. Fake news, right? He was admittedly concerned with administrative issues and reorganization. And I would suggest, if you're interested in things like global climate change, our banking system, our economic system, you might want to read his book. And his book is shown here, and it's called Light at the End of the Tunnel. It's a survival plan for the human species. Now, why do I bring this up? It's because he knew Dr. Michael Wolff. And Dr. Michael Wolff told him that there were 4 ET alliances in existence, that UFOs were real, and the U.S., or the secret government, I should say, I prefer to use the word secret government. The secret government was in possession of ET technologies that might be able to be used to reverse global climate change. And that's the reason why he brought the subject of UFOs and ETs up in his book. Now, in his book, he said, based upon Dr. Michael Wolff's experience, there were, excuse me, there were 4 ET alliances. One was called the Alliance, one was called the Corporate, one was called the Federation of Worlds, and one was called the United Races of Orion. Doesn't this sound like Star Trek? I have to admit to you, I'm a Star Trekker from the 60s. Okay. In Hellier's book, he also described a secret government consisting of Majestic 12 and a group called the Cabal. You all pretty much know or heard about Majestic 12, but the Cabal was described as a group of xenophobic and paranoid admirals and generals who would rather shoot down ETs rather than talk to them. That's almost a direct quote from Hellier's book. He also described unacknowledged special access programs in NSC, CIA, NRO, and what have you. And he also explained that there was an exchange program, a quid pro quo between the secret government and one or more ET alliances. And in exchange for ET technologies, we provided access to underground bases and underwater bases. The photograph below is one of Dr. Michael Wolff and the UFO researcher, the well-known UFO researcher, Paula Harris. I believe Paula Harris is in attendance this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. Yes? Oh, okay. Dr. Michael Wolff, at this point, was dying. He had cancer. And he died about 17 or 18 years ago. Now, Dr. Michael Wolff said that he was a consultant to the CIA and the NSC, and he worked, he was a team leader in MJ-12, and he called it SSG, standing for Special Studies Group. He claimed that he lived and worked with a gray that was known as Kolta, K-O-L-T-A. He also said that he was on a very good relationship with a Nordic by the name of Sa-Ra, 2 words, S-A-R-A. He claimed to have worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the S-4 base in Nevada, and at Dulce. His book, by the way, if any of you are interested, Dr. Wolff published a book called The Catchers of Heaven shortly before his death. Now, this is the first of 3 models. Now, I have not done anything other than diagram what the Paul Hellyer book and what was documented in a lecture, an interview that was taken with Dr. Wolff, obviously before his death. You know, when I was in elementary school, I was taught how to diagram sentences. Some of you may have actually had that experience too. And it was to give the student a chance to understand how English sentences were structured. Well, all I've done is to take these books and diagram them. So on the left, you'll see 4 blocks. One is the Alliance, and that one is said to be the Nordics and the Semitics. The one on the right there in dark red is the Corporate, and these are the Greys, allegedly from Zeta Reticuli, according to the books. And then below them is the United Races of Orion, and those are the Reptilians. And to the left is sort of a catch-all alliance called the Federation of Worlds. And these are several different races, mostly humanoid. Now, once again, I realize you cannot read this from the back, but if you'll go to my website, I'll send you a copy of this entire document. You can print them out and do what you want with them. I hope they're informative. To the right, I have diagrammed the Cabal and MJ-12. I've enclosed it in a larger dashed blue line, and I've titled it The Secret Government. It's showing as a dark blue dashed line much larger than the other circles, because this is to reflect the fact that there must be other unacknowledged special access programs, or USAPs, also cooperating with the secret government in other departments of the government. I've shown a blue arrow coming from, well, one or more of the ET alliances. That is to indicate any ET technologies that might have been given to the secret government in exchange for what I've shown with the red arrow, the exchange of the use of various bases underground or underwater. It's basically a quid pro quo agreement. So this is the Wolf model, and I've just tried to document exactly what I read. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Michael Salla and Corey Goode's testimony. Michael Salla has, most of you know, has written a number of books, but the one that I'm talking about is specifically the one called Insiders Reveal, Secret Space Programs, and Extraterrestrial Alliances. I would suggest that you read this book too. Now, in what will be called the good model, which you'll see in a minute, there are 9 different human and ET alliances that are described, and these are they. In Dr. Salla's book, under Secret Government, he identifies the group called the Cabal, which we just talked about, and another one which is called the Illuminati. That is a Latin word representing an ancient secret society of elite people. These would have been, going back hundreds of years, these would have been bankers, businessmen, military leaders, politicians, and probably religious leaders. In other words, the elite people of that day. I'm sure you all realize that we have a similar elite group here in this country. I'll mention one word, the Bilderberg Group. I won't say anything more, but you might want to look into that. And once again, we have an exchange of ET technologies for access to Earth. Below the image of Dr. Salla's book is a photograph of Corey Goode, who has provided testimony of his experience to Dr. Salla. And Corey Goode will be following within 15 minutes or so after I finish. Stay tuned. Now, in the background is an artist representation of a sphere being. This is a blue humanoid with sort of a feather top, let's say. I'm sure Corey will be discussing that in his presentation. Now let's take a look at the good model. The good model is a bit more complex than the Wolf model, I can assure you. This is what it looks like. Oh, I should say this, before I show this, this is actually a work in progress. Please understand that. I have asked Dr. Salla to provide his comments and suggestions as to any corrections, improvements, or enhancements that I can do to make this more accurately reflect his book and Corey Goode's testimony. But this is what it looks like. All right. So you see, I promised you that you would be seeing something new, right? Now, these 3 models are taken right out of my book, The Total Novice's Guide to the Secret Space Program. On the upper level, all 5 of these groups are human alliances of some kind. Down on the bottom level, the 2 on the lower right are also human. The 3 on the left are somewhat different. The green box represents the reptilians. We can't seem to get away from the reptilians, can we? The orange is a combination of humans and non-humans, which we'll be getting into in a couple of minutes. And then the purple one is called the Sphere Being Alliance. Now, for those of you who were at the dinner on Friday night, you may remember that Dr. Sala very briefly described an alliance that was like a corporation. He also described an alliance that was fundamentally a late version or future version of the Nazi German flying disc program of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Now, I spoke to one person about his reaction to what he heard, and he said, I was doing fine with Dr. Sala's talk until they got onto the subject of the Nazis and the Germans, and at that point I just gave up. I wouldn't react quite that same way. The important thing is to keep a good sense of humor, but also an open mind, and that's the best suggestion that I can make at this point. Okay, let's start in the lower right. This is the Solar Warden SSP. It is, just as described several times yesterday, a human program which is basically directed by the Naval Command, U.S. Naval Command. It's now known as the U.S. Naval Network and Space Operations Command, as far as I know, and is located in Virginia. There are, according to what I've read, there are 8 spacecraft carriers, plus other vessels such as research vessels and probably support vessels. But you'll hear far more from Corey Good on that. I can only report what I've read. Now, the black lines here represent an interlinked relationship. And according to the book, there is an interlinked relationship to what is called the SSP Alliance. Once again, these are humans. It's formed from former Solar Warden personnel and spacecraft, as well as former personnel from other alliances. I can add that it is directed by what is called the SSP Alliance Council. And the human participants or countries or nations are the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Now there's a direct connection to another one called the Earth Alliance, in sort of a medium blue here on the upper right. Now, according to the book, these are sort of like the white hats or the good guys from the military-industrial complex. And they support the SSP Alliance by providing supply, support, and command assistance. And the participants there are the United States and the BRICS nations. The BRICS are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. All right. Now let me bring in the Sphere Being Alliance in purple. There seems to be a direct connection between the SSP Alliance and the Sphere Beings. These are the blue humanoids with the feathers. Apparently, from what I understand from the book, the SSP Alliance and the Sphere Being Alliance are not exactly on easy communication terms. And I believe that Corey Goode will explain that he was sort of like an intermediary between these two groups. Now, the Sphere Being Alliance is non-human. It is said to be a Type 3 or Type 4 civilization, meaning it's much more spiritual, and it's nonviolent. Now, as you can see, there's a direct connection or relationship between the Sphere Being Alliance and the Super Federation. And I believe that Corey Goode may also get involved in that relationship too. The Super Federation is both human and non-human. It's a UN type of alliance. And according to what I've read, there are 40 to 60 different ET groups in this particular alliance. Now, someone may say, whoa, 60. Well, if you'll remember, there was a gentleman by the name of Clifford Stone. And he was a technical sergeant in the Army. And according to his testimony, he participated in crash retrievals. And he claimed to have recovered deceased alien bodies as well as live ETs. And if you'll go to his website, you'll see the names of 57 different ET species that he claims to have come across in one way or the other. All right. Now let's go to the red block. If you remember from Dr. Sala's presentation, he briefly mentioned that there was a corporation involved in one of these alliances. Does anyone remember that? I know he said that very briefly, but it was there. This is called the ICC, or the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate. It's a human organization, and as I understand from the book, it operates multiple mining operations on Mars. And they fabricate high-tech products, and in a bartering arrangement with other ET alliances, they exchange their products for the ET products. These, in my opinion, are sort of the bad boys of the neighborhood because they are solely profiteers. And they participate in human trafficking, slave labor. So that's why I call them the bad boys. And there's apparently, from what I understand, a direct relationship between the ICC and the Cabal, and the Illuminati and MJ-12, which are represented with the blue circle. Now, in Dr. Sala's book, he brings out the subject of rogue special access programs, SAPs, rogue SAPs. These, as I understand it, are special access programs within international corporations and foreign governments. And they're called rogue because they have little or no oversight by their own government, and they sort of do their own thing. Hopefully you'll be hearing more about that. The black, I should say, rectangle in the upper left-hand corner are the Dark Fleet. The Dark Fleet are the present day, as I understand it, follow-on from the Nazi German flying saucer programs of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. A number of them were sent off, apparently, to Argentina and or Antarctica. And somehow these guys are still in action. Now, they operate, according to the book, outside of the solar system. And lastly, we have these fellows known as the reptilians. This is the Draconian Federation Alliance. I put it in green. They're highly militaristic, and so is the Dark Fleet. So apparently the Nazis and the reptilians get along just great. Maybe I shouldn't laugh. It just sounds sort of funny. Now, the Draconian Federal Alliance, well, I think we've pretty much heard enough about reptilians yesterday, so I won't go into any more of that. I will mention that the Global Galactic League of Nations, which is immediately under the SSP Alliance, is human. It is run by the United Nations. It operates under a NATO type of SSP, and it operates primarily outside of the solar system. Now, being a former and current day Star Trekker, I would like you all to consider which one of these alliances would be most like Starfleet from Star Trek. Sorry? The Federation. Okay, the Super Federation? Well, no, not like Starfleet, the Federation. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, right. The Federation of Planets. Right. Okay. All right. To me, the closest thing that we see on this diagram, the closest thing to Starfleet would be the League of Nations, because these represent, or allegedly represent, they're basically a human group. They work on a NATO basis, and they operate outside of the solar system, and I suggest that these are the explorers. These are the guys that actually go out beyond the solar system and explore the galaxy. I hope that makes sense. Sorry? That's right. Where no man has gone before. Boldly go. Hey, why not? You've heard a lot of other stranger things than this weekend, right? Okay, that's the good model. Once again, it's a work in progress. Now, I would like to suggest that since I'm more of a moderate in this, and I'm not out at the extreme end of a spectrum, as I mentioned before, I'd like to propose a hybrid model that takes a little bit from the wolf model and a little bit from the good model and combines them. So this is my proposal. This model, as you can see, takes the 4 ET alliances from the wolf model, unchanged. And to the right of that is what I would like to call, I think it's better to call it the secret world government, because obviously there are other nations involved in this besides the United States. I think that's been pretty well proven. And within the secret government, once again, we have MJ-12. We have something called the Cabal. I don't take a big exception to that, and also the Illuminati. That works for me, as well as other USAPs from 3-letter government organizations, plus foreign organizations such as MI6. Now, supporting the secret world, I propose, would be the Navy. This is the dark blue, known as the Naval Network and Space Operations Command. And I suggest that they are operating a space fleet called Solar Warden. I have no reason to debate that, but it would consist of 2 or more spacecraft carriers, as described, plus research vessels, plus support vessels. And I'm suggesting also that they provide security for the solar system, and they support bases on the moon and Mars. Now, Dr. Wolf, before he published his book, stated that there was 1 base on Mars and 1 base on the moon. I know that's hard to believe for those who have starting to study the subject, but I don't find that impossible to believe or accept. Now below that, in light blue, is something called Space Corps. Well, what is Space Corps? This was formerly the U.S. Air Force Space Command. They operate out of Colorado Springs in Colorado. And if you've been following the news fairly recently, about a week ago or so, the House Armed Services Committee, in a vote of 60-1, voted to establish a new branch of the military services. This would be called, they proposed, Space Corps. And it would take over the responsibilities of the former Space Command and be a brand new branch. Well, why do that? To me, it's to acknowledge the fact that space, as they see it, space is a warfare domain. And it's to give more emphasis to space operations than it's had in the past. So that's why it says Space Corps. Now, Space Corps, I'm suggesting, would operate the Space Corps Space Fleet. This might consist of the TR-3Bs, small fleet of those, or other vessels, other spacecraft, and they would provide security for the manned space stations and the Earth. Once again, my sense is that there's one or more military space stations in operation. So that's my hybrid model. That too is a work in progress. I have published the Wolf model on my website, and when I hear a response from Dr. Sala, I'll update the good model as well as the hybrid model, if that's necessary. So let's just compare the Wolf model with the good model. There are some obvious matches and near matches. But there's also some mismatches. Both of them call for the existence of the Cabal and MJ-12, so I would say that's a near equivalence. If you add NNSOC and Space Corps, that's somewhat like adding Solar Warden, the SSP Alliance, and Earth Alliance. The reptilians are straightforward. The Wolf model calls for the United Races of Orion, and the good model calls for the Draconian Federal Alliance. By the way, don't put too much importance about the exact names of these alliances. From the Wolf model, I can tell you that according to Dr. Michael Wolf, the names of these 4 ET alliances were the names that were actually used by MJ-12. Okay, the mismatches. Well, within the Wolf model, there is no interplanetary corporate conglomerate. That's not to say it doesn't exist. After all, Dr. Wolf passed away something like 17 or 18 years ago, and we all know a lot can change in 17 or 18 years. There's also no mention of the Dark Fleet, the Nazi German SSP, or for that matter, the League of Nations, the Rogue SAPs, or the Sphere Being Alliance. Once again, that's not saying that it doesn't exist. So here's my moderates working hypothesis. There is a secret space program, and plural, space programs. They're real and not imaginary. They use the human anti-gravity technology is real and in a mature stage. There is a human space fleet. There are one or more military space stations, as described by Dr. Sala. There are at least one base on the moon and one on Mars. And there are ETs and humans are in one or more alliances. Pretty staggering stuff when you think about it. As I say, to me, even after 65 years, this all seems to be quite strange and bizarre, but I'm going with the flow. Okay, now here's the commercial aspect of my presentation. My most recent book is The Total Novice's Guide to the Secret Space Program. My books are normally about 500 pages, and they're printed or displayed in full color. My UFO book is being sold by MUFON this weekend, and it's 500 pages. Every page is full color. The Secret Space Program book is available right now in digital form from iTunes or from Amazon.com. Some people have asked me, why do you call it the Total Novice's Guide? Well, this is sort of like the Idiot's Guide, right? But I don't like to use the word idiots. Dummies. Yeah, there's another one called dummies. I don't like that word either. I think novice is a much more gentle way of describing people. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not an expert in this. I'm a novice. And I suggest, if you don't mind, that many people in this audience are novices too. We're all trying to learn about this. And when someone asks me, how far has this program progressed over the last 70 years, my response is, I don't know. But I know there's a secret space program based upon what I've seen and what I've heard. I might add that in the early 1990s, I called up Jan Harsan, and I said, Jan, it's time that you went out to Area 51. You got to see this place. Now, I had purchased a Volkswagen camper before that because it gets very cold out there, as you might imagine, in the winter. And I said, Jan, we're going to go out there on a Wednesday night. And I can't promise you that you're going to see anything at all. Maybe nothing. So that's the risk. And it's a long trip out there. We all know that. Well, anyway, we were out there on Wednesday night. We aimed the camper directly at the Groom Mountains, where S4 is located. And we waited and waited and waited until around midnight. And we finally decided we weren't going to see anything that night. So we got up around 5:45 the next morning, talking about heading back. And it was full daylight. Okay? No clouds, bright sun. And at 6 o'clock, approximately 6 o'clock, we were looking towards Las Vegas. And at about 40 degrees off the deck, a very bright, brilliant white light suddenly appeared. And it gradually followed a very jagged flight path directly towards Groom Mountain and disappeared behind the mountain. This was not an aircraft. It was not a helicopter. There was no noise. And the luminosity of this object or craft was maintained the same throughout that course of flight. It didn't change in luminosity whatsoever. So it was not a headlight from an aircraft or something like that. 5 minutes later, a second one appeared. It went through a similar jagged flight path, disappearing behind Groom Mountain. And then 5 minutes later, roughly, a third one appeared suddenly, just out of nowhere. And it followed a similar flight path. Now, I would suggest to all of you that if you have never been out to Area 51, you should go there at least one time in your life just to see what it looks like. You'll see how remote it is. You'll see the little alien inn. You'll see the gates. You may see some of the cameras. You might even see some of the guards out there. But it's a terrific trip. It's organized by Tony, who's known for years. He is a professional tour guide, and he lectures throughout the course of the trip out there. I have talked to several people this weekend to see what they thought about it, and they said it was a terrific show. And I think someone said they might have even seen something at night. Lastly, I want to mention two documents. There was a document that was called, let me read it, Outside the Box, Space and Terrestrial Transportation and Energy Technologies for the 21st Century. This was prepared by Dr. Ted Loder, who was a professor at the University of New Hampshire. And in 12 pages, he details the history of America's secret space program. And I have reprinted this in my book, in the UFO book, as well as in the secret space program book in one of the appendices. And lastly, for those of you who have a technical bent, I would suggest you might want to read Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. This is written by Dr. Paul Laviolette. I have heard him speak at other UFO conferences, and this gives you a greater insight into multiple technologies that would be used to develop anti-gravity propulsion. Now, I sort of like this image that I'm ending up with here. That is my that's my website. This image is very interesting. It's sort of like a question mark, and it makes you wonder, how far have we progressed over the last 70 years? Well, I hope you've all enjoyed this week. I've had a great time, personally, and I hope you enjoy Las Vegas. Thank you. Okay, there you go.
Okay. Do you have this ready? Are you ready?